I should get used to it because I'm going to be doing a lot more of these next year.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
let me help you practice.
Yeah.
I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. My guest today is a money expert. She's an accredited financial counselor in Canada. She's a well-known speaker. I think I've seen you on every television news program that there is. You're the host of the More Money podcast and the founder of a financial education company called More Money Media, Inc. So fancy. Jessica Moorehouse, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So a little context here. So Jess and
Mm,
I have definitely some mutual friends. We've
mm.
run into each other at shows and throughout music industry stuff. Your husband is a producer engineer. Do I have that
Engineer.
right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Josh, and he's fantastic, and he was one of the best people I worked with during my time at SiriusXM.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually took one of your courses. I think it's about 2 years ago now. What was that course called again?
Called Wealth Building Blueprint for Canadians. I'm
And,
curious, actually, since you brought it up, how have you been doing since you started? Because 2 years, a lot can happen in
yeah.
2 years. How you doing?
It's funny because I took that course when I was plotting my business, I
Mm,
guess, right? Where I
mm.
was thinking that I needed to change some things up. I didn't want to work for the man anymore, I guess
Yeah.
you could say. So that's when I looked to your course, and I think a level of trust I love too, because I didn't think you were trying to sell me something above my level. Like it
Mm-hmm.
felt really friendly, and for someone who's like in a beginning stage of thinking
Yeah.
about their finances, the automation of life when you work for a company is super interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you work for a company, you can contribute to our RSPs, you get
Mm-hmm.
paid every 2 weeks. Like all those things just sort of happen and fall
Mm-hmm.
into your lap. However, when you work for yourself,
Yeah. You've
there are
got to be the
things.
payroll department and the tax planner. You've got to be all those things.
Exactly. So I knew that I needed a little education on that. And now, do you want to hear the worst thing ever?
Mm.
I need to go back to your course
Oh,
and pick it back up because I never finished it.
okay. That's okay. And that's why you get
Yeah.
lifetime access to the course, because I know a lot of students start it, life happens, and then they
Yeah.
pause and then they decide to go back to it. So that's the other kind of great thing. It's like you can, and
Yes.
even with just anything when it comes to your finances, it's never too late. You can pick it up at any time.
And I think part of that was that my exit at SiriusXM
Mm-hmm.
happened in a way that I needed some time to
Yeah.
process. We'll put it that way.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, I had to put certain things in front of the other.
Yeah,
Now I'm in
absolutely.
a place where I feel like I can save money, whereas back then it was like, oh,
Survival mode a little
yeah.
bit. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why I'm very grateful to have that course. And you know what? The downtime of the holidays feels like the perfect time for that. I will say we're
Totally.
recording this mid-December. And at this point, I have not decided if I want to release this episode in January or December, last of the year, first of the year. But I think
Mm-hmm.
those are two key times
Mm-hmm.
during someone's financial planning. Looking
Yeah.
back, reflecting, or
Uh-huh.
budgeting and looking ahead, forecasting.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I always think of December is where when everyone kind of throws caution to the wind and just like spends a ton of money because it's the
Yes.
holidays. You got that excuse. And then January is like your hangover and you're like, oh, what happened? And then trying to figure out how do I recover from that. It's not a shame thing. It's just like that is what everyone does, including myself. I spend so much more money than I normally do in December. And then I have to try to make up for it in January. But that's the other thing. It's like, that's okay. That's what everyone does. And as long as you like get back on that horse, and I always feel like excited and motivated in January. Like I always consider it as like, new year, new you kind of thing. And let's
Right.
get going and stuff like that. And that's really, I feel like when I decided, because you and me talk about like working out and stuff, like that's when I in January last year I'm like, I need to do something different with my fitness. And I know everyone talks about that in January, but I'm like, no, this is the year. And I've actually stuck to it. Like it was
I'm
very
so
slow
proud
to
of you.
start, but I've actually stuck to it. It feels really good.
I brought Jess to an F45 class one
And I
time
almost
this year.
died.
And she, I think you were intimidated, but I think I
Yeah.
got you hooked.
Oh yeah.
Did
After
I?
that, once we finished, I'm like, oh, it felt so good. Because I had no idea how it worked. And I'm like, what is happening? But I've been doing it consistently since April.
I'm
So
so
like a
proud of
good
you.
3-4 times a week. So yeah, I absolutely love it. But it is very, I was talk about how fitness and finance are so
They
connected. They
are.
really are, right? They are hard things to do. They are things that we need to do because we need to be healthy and we need to be financially healthy. And it always seems like you're in this struggle alone, but everyone's struggling the same way. Just no one's talking about it, right? Like, not many people
Yes.
talk about, like, I want to, like, I don't know, not with me and my friends. It's like we don't really talk about, like, oh, I have these love handles that won't go away or
Right.
what have you, unless you know someone who's doing it. And then you'll whisper, hey, I see that you're doing F45. Can I go to a class? Or, hey, I saw you posted something on social media about how you're in debt and you're started this, budget. Can you give me some tips or something like that?
I will say that those resources from the course that I got access to,
Hmm.
I am using and I'm very grateful for them.
Yay.
So thank you for those
Wonderful. You're
things.
so welcome.
So your story is interesting and it's really intriguing because you did not start out in this financial world at all. Let's recap how you got into finance.
Yeah, it's a weird story. Now looking back, you're like, oh gosh, I've been doing this for so long. But I went to university for film, thought I was going to be a famous film editor and win an Oscar and or director and just do all the things, Hollywood. And graduated during 2009 and realized I actually was not prepared for the real world at all. And I actually did not want to work in the film industry at all.
And you were in
No.
Vancouver at this point or
I was in
Toronto?
Vancouver. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
originally from Vancouver. So I was doing all of that in Vancouver. And so I pivoted hard. It was the recession. I just needed a job to move out of my parents' basement and start my life. And I got, well, after a year of just kind of doing random things, got a job in a newspaper and was there for 3 years. Not my ideal situation. It was like looking back, like I learned a lot of things. It was a really great experience. But during that time, when I was really trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life because it's not film anymore. I really didn't have
Yeah.
any kind of anchor anymore or guiding light. That's when I actually discovered personal finance because I wanted to know, how do I budget my paycheck? How do I pay off my student loans? How do I do all of this? And it was actually my older sister who started, she's 3 years older. She started looking at personal finance blogs for her own self. She's like, oh, you should check them out. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I just got so fascinated that people were talking about so openly how much they were earning and spending, what their net worth was. They were just putting it all out there. Like, I'm like, no one talks about that. That's
What
wild.
was the first financial book that you read?
God. Wait, what's it called? The Wealthy Barber, like every Canadian ever.
I have that. A friend gave it to me. I have it, and I need to
It might
read
be a
that.
bit like the original version might be a bit dated. I think he came out with a new version, but it's still like in general, like all of the principles he has in the book are still
Yeah.
relevant, which is great. But that was kind of the introduction. And then I'm just like, ooh, maybe I could start a blog. I was looking for a creative outlet after not, having a reason to like write films or anything anymore. And I just kept doing that on the side for a good 5 years while working different sales marketing jobs. And then I realized, why am I spending all of my free time doing the thing that is my passion? Maybe I should make that my main thing.
Yeah.
So I, was slowly kind of putting cash in my bank account as a little kind of F off fund, as they call it, though I didn't really know that's what I was doing. I was just hoarding cash subconsciously. And then it came to a point in my, the last job I ever had where I'm like, I need to leave. This is not a good environment for me. I'm not moving up. I need to do something else. And that was 7 years ago. And look at me now. Look at me now,
Look at
y'all.
her now. Yeah, and like you kind of took over the financial spotlight, and I think the reason that happened is because the way that you kind of break down, decode,
Hmm.
or explain things that are normally very intimidating to people is
Yeah.
so easy to digest. So, I mean, thank you first of all.
You're welcome.
But
I mean, I do that intentionally because when
yes,
I entered, the personal finance community, I found it very intimidating. It was very, and this was going back, what, 12 years ago or something like that. All of the content, th- the content that I found relatable and understandable was by women, but they mainly talked about debt and budgeting, and which is fine. But when you want to like level up, learn about investing or taxes or anything a little bit more complicated, it was all men who talked about that, and
yeah,
they have a different way of explaining things and using, I just was not welcoming. And I'm like, wouldn't it be great if there was someone who could decode and translate this stuff and not really have this sense of entitlement that a lot of them have. Like you go on Reddit or Personal Finance Canada Reddit, and my gosh, people are so cruel. They're like, oh, you don't know that, or that's the wrong term for that. That is not how you encourage people to learn more and to improve their financial literacy. And so, not to say that I was the first woman to ever do this, but I definitely
right.
wanted to make sure I was in that group to make sure it could be different for the next generation, or just anybody. You can be 40, 50, 60. I have people
Yeah.
those ages in my course that finally feel like, hey, I can trust Jessica and she really explains things in a way I finally understand. Maybe I can actually learn how to save for retirement. How great.
How amazing.
How amazing.
That was one part of the course that was pretty great. There's a lot of support in like a closed group
Mhm.
that you can interact, ask questions to everyone. And I remember being like, wow, there are so many people that are like totally different ages in this group, different backgrounds, and
It shocked me too, because like I
yeah.
thought in general, depending on, looking at certain demographics for like my podcast or my Instagram or my YouTube, in general it's millennials, but I'm hitting all of those kind of different
Yeah.
demographics, younger, older, and I love that because it shouldn't just be for a certain type of person. This stuff is for everybody, and I want
Yeah.
and I feel like too, especially if you're in your 50s, 60s, maybe there really wasn't anyone when you were in your 20s, 30s or
Yeah.
40s who was able to make you feel seen.
Yeah. So on that front, since you brought it up about being a woman in this space,
Mm.
can you give me, maybe a lesson learned in how you operate in the space, and also maybe like a great experience that you had that made you feel empowered?
Oh gosh. You know what? There's a lot of women I've looked up to, and I still look up to, who've done a lot of amazing things that made me feel like it was possible. Lots of them are, on TV, and I aspire to have careers like them. And they have been really encouraging. That's one thing that I realized is, like, if you want to have a career with longevity, you need to find those people that you can become friends with and look up to, and don't, think that, oh, there's competition. There's no, the best
It's
thing to,
community.
yeah, it's community. That is the answer to everything, is community, and supporting and lifting up each other. And so that's been really, really helpful. But it took a while to find those people, because even still, especially when we just look at like the personal finance Canada space, it's still a very small space. And it's growing, which I love, that especially seeing younger content creators and educators. But it was a small space to start, and it was very male dominated. Not to say that I haven't also made friendships with
Of
men in the
course.
space, but as women, we do face certain barriers that men just don't.
Mhm.
For instance, I know for a fact I've probably worked harder in terms of getting formal education in this space than most men who have
Waltzed in.
thriving. Yeah, like, I've had to get credentials that lots of these men don't have to get, and they're still being paid the same as me. And so that's
Mm.
always been one thing that I've had to, it just is the reality. If I want to be taken seriously, I have to work twice as hard. And I think every woman can kind of relate to that. It's like, I have to get those credentials. I have to put myself out there more. I have to have a YouTube channel, a podcast, and do all of these things. Whereas sometimes man could just have one and just be thriving. And
So you're
that's
talking
just,
about like the
yeah.
accreditation and
Yeah. That's why I have the AFCC. That's why I'm working towards my CFP. And, before I got this book deal, I've been working on that all year. I
we
was
will
hoping
talk
that I
about the
was,
book.
yes. And I was hoping that I was going to be able to finish it this year, but that's kind of been put on pause because it's a lot of freaking work to study for this particular exam. There's like a lot of exams I've had to do in order to get to this point, and then this is like the last leg of it. Yeah. It doesn't bug me as much now, probably because I have done a lot of work to be like, well, look on my LinkedIn. Like, you could look at, you can, look
The
all day, or
receipts are there.
there's receipts all day long.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating that that could be a reason that a woman doesn't want to either pursue this as a career, or even just pursue this for their personal financial life, because they're afraid of being judged or criticized because, oh, you don't know that, when you're such an idiot. And
Yeah.
that doesn't make you want to like crack open a book and start learning. You just feel like, oh, I'm the problem. Maybe I am too
Yeah.
stupid. Yeah.
On the empowerment side of things, do you think
Yeah.
do you think like it was the podcast that maybe like thrust you into this confidence?
There's kind of a couple things. Like, first, the podcast was definitely something that empowered me, because I had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of smart people. And now it's been going on for 8 years. I'm, 380 plus episodes. Talking to that many people over that period of time really builds your confidence, because you could realize, oh, I can have a conversation with you and keep up, and talk about certain complex topics. I've had really smart PhD professionals, experts, economists on the show, and I'm like, I can keep up with you, and that feels really freaking good. I'd say the other thing is like as part of my course, in order to get into it, you have to apply and then you have to have a call with me. And I do this strategically so everyone who enters the course is happy to be there. They want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And but because it's also great for me because then I get to have these really intimate conversations with my audience who've maybe discovered me in one way or another, and I can find out what's going on in their lives, and I can have these conversations that are, I think, really important for both of us. And that's really empowering because a lot of it is like, hey, I discovered you and on Instagram or YouTube. This really helped me and I want to keep going. And I'm like, that is so encouraging for me to also keep going and creating content and helping others. That's what, gives me that drive.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't hurt when a media outlet calls and they're like,
No, it
would
doesn't
you
feel
be our
bad.
money expert? What was
It
the
does feel
first
nice.
call like?
Gosh, the first time, I mean, I think the first time I was ever on like a actual like TV show, because I've been doing like, quotes here and there for like online and newspapers and stuff since 2015. But I think the first time was a CBC um show. I can't remember what it was, but it was with, and I can't remember her name, but she used to be, I'm not sure if she's still the host of Dragon's Den, the blonde lady. I can't remember her name. I'm terrible.
Okay. Here,
I know.
we'll
Google.
just do a quick Google.
Do a quick Google.
Host of Dragon's Den Canada. Diane Buckner.
I think so. Yeah, she
Yeah.
blonde and
Yep.
yeah. Like
Yeah.
she's been the same host for ages. And so I used to be like obsessed with Dragon's Den. And so then I was called, this was back in 2017. It was I think maybe midway through the year, at the end of the year or something like that. And to be like on her like the show and talking to her, and I was so starstruck. I'm like, oh my God. And I told him like, I'm a big fan. It was so exciting. And I'm like, I did it. I held my own. I this was very exciting. And then after that, another goal was like, I want to be a regular on some sort of show. And at the end of 2017, a producer from CTV contacted me over Twitter DM and said, hey, I've been,
Yeah.
watching what you've been doing. Do you want to be on this show? And it was called Mind the Gap. And I did it for like 3 years, like maybe once a month or every second month or something like that, where it was just a panel show with me and someone else of a different generation. There's the age gap kind of thing. And we talked about like
Right.
whatever the topic of the day was. And that was a really big thing for me because it was something regular, and did it give me some great media training. Learning
There
on the
you
job.
go.
Learning on the job.
Yeah.
That is how people ask me like, oh, how do you, talk so eloquently or whatever on the medium? Like literally just doing it and not
Yeah.
being afraid to mess up. And it didn't
Just do
also
it.
and it also did help. One of the side gigs I had in my 20s was a teleprompter operator for the news. And so I was
Oh.
scrolling script for these anchors and like just kind of, I guess, memorized how they talked and what they did and when they messed up what they'd say, and then I think part of that is just like ingrained in me. So I'm like, oh, you can ask me anything on the media. I'm really good at pivoting or saying something doing the political, like, well, that's a great question, I'm gonna not answer it and answer a different question.
So smart. And you know what? I have to say too, like I looked to your podcast. I just thought it was done so well and it was like so clean and concise. The audio was good. Thank you,
I mean,
Josh.
thank you, Josh, for now. Josh, thank God he's off the hook. He did that podcast for me for free. Because honestly, I wasn't making money with the podcast for several years, probably for like 6 years or 5 or 6 years, until now I have a editor. Thank God.
Well, that's what I was going to say, like I really found inspiration in starting this podcast and watching what you were doing because, I just think that you took something that needed to be talked about more and made it into such like a well-rounded podcast. And I always thought that was very cool.
Thank you.
Okay. So now I want to talk about, kind of like another parallel to fitness and finance is like mental health and finance and how you think about money, how you've been brought up thinking about money, how you internalize your thoughts about money.
Oh man.
So maybe if you're comfortable, you can start about like your relationship with money in that way. And then we can talk about how it kind of filters into life.
Yeah, no, this is a great transition because this is exactly what my book is about. And I'm still, I've got a couple months left before I have to finish the book. So I'm still like in the thick of it. And it's been a very interesting year, not only writing the book, but part of it is me having to dive into my own relationship with money, doing a lot of different therapy, and really going deep and raw, which is very difficult for me because, as I've discovered, I do have trauma. Pretty much everyone does, and it could be big or small, it doesn't matter, but most of us have been touched by it in some way, and that will affect how you move forward in lots of your relationships, including your relationship with money. And so I didn't really realize until this year, oh, my relationship with money has been very toxic. It's been very unhealthy,
Really?
very unhealthy. Because I always, like many people, thought it if I got more, and then if I could get that career that, made more money, if I could hit those milestones like so many people on social media, oh, I made $1 million or blah, blah, blah. I make this amount, every year, I'll be happy. It will solve all my problems. It will make me feel, like I'm actually valuable. Like it'll cure everything.
Right.
And I realized that is a crazy thing to think. Like that is not how you should look at money at all. That is not helpful.
Yeah.
You need to be able to love yourself and enjoy your life no matter how much you're earning or how much is in your bank account, because how much money you have or what your current salary is has nothing to do with how valuable you are as a person, how important you are to a lot of people in your life. But that's not really how money is kind of shown, in the media or in TV shows or on social media. It's you're better if you have more, and that's really a terrible message to ingrain in yourself and to adopt.
Yeah.
And so what I've been able to do is, a lot of therapy to find out what are some of my unhealed wounds, and then what is the connection there to how I operate with money, or why have I been so ambitious since, gosh, I don't know, maybe end of high school. And part of it was like I wanted to prove to people that hurt me that I am worthy, which is like
Mm.
I've been, running this whole time. I've been just, working and hustling and experiencing burnout because I'm running away from some of my unhealed trauma, which
Hmm.
is wild. I mean, it's one of those things, though, it's a double-edged sword because it's like now I understand that that's not good, but also I have ended up in a place where I am, financially comfortable. I've got a career I really like. So that's great. But I wish I was able to achieve that with a much healthier mindset and wasn't so harsh on
Yeah.
myself and didn't, get motivated by negative self-talk. Like there's so many things. And, I discovered that about myself, but then I've also been able to interview a lot of people for my book and find out some of their origin stories and some of their traumas and their relationships with money. And it's wild. Everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And you may not know it because no one's asked you the right questions before.
And wouldn't you agree that all of this is exacerbated by like large markets? Like, I'm talking Vancouver and
Yeah.
Toronto, and I feel like there will be many people listening from those markets to this conversation. I don't know where, like, just to share a little
Hmm.
piece of my history with money. I don't I don't remember too much in terms of like keeping track.
Hmm.
Like I was saying at the beginning of the episode. It's always just been kind of like an automatic thing that the money shows up and the money leaves.
Hmm.
There's just the transactions that I paid attention to, like, after first call it summer job, right?
Hmm.
Like working at Dairy Queen.
Hmm.
Um
Oh, my mom used to work at Dairy Queen. That was her first summer job
that's so
too. She
funny.
talks about it with fondness still. She's like, that
Oh
was one of
yeah.
the best jobs I've ever had.
I had to buy like a birthday cake for a girlfriend a few weeks ago, and watching the DQ person write on the cake, I wanted to jump over the counter and be like,
You're
"Can
like,
I
that's not how
just
you
do
do it.
it? Can I just do it?" So funny. But yeah, like going back to those days, like I wish that when I was 16 and had that job that someone had a conversation with me
Yeah.
about that. But
Hmm.
the truth is I don't even think parents are equipped for those
No,
conversations.
they're doing the
And
best. Like most of them are doing the best they can with running like nothing. Like talking
yeah.
to my own family, this is one thing that I talk about in the book is like, oh my gosh, you've got to do a family inventory and figure out what happened and talk to your
Yeah.
parents about how did your parents talk to you about money? Likely they didn't. And so
Yes.
they just learned things by observation. Some of those things were great, some of them were very unhealthy. Um,
Yeah.
and so, for example, my mom, she's always been very great at budgeting and like, hates debt. She's been very good. I've adopted some of those things just from observation. Those are great. But the unhealthy part that we both have is we are terrified of something going wrong. So we won't take risks, or it's very difficult for us to do something
Yeah.
different if we were like, I've been investing this way for so long, I can't change now. Even though you're like, the data shows you probably should make a change. This actually is maybe the best route
Yeah.
to take. And so, but again, it's like, I don't blame her. She did the best she can. She gave me a lot of great tools, but also her toolbox was limited. And so we need to figure out how can we get some
Yeah.
more tools for a toolbox, because we're missing some pieces here.
Yeah, and I almost feel like, me running my own business now has really been something that has actually been the most educational for me in my
Hmm.
entire life, because I've come from a family who, has been comfortable, and
Hmm.
my dad owns a family business,
Hmm.
and, was passed on to him from his father. And everyone's always been comfortable, and I think that led to us not talking about money.
Because it
And
was
that
always
all
there. And you're
yes,
like, okay, we're good. Yeah.
and that also led to, like, where, a lot of kids are like, they can feel when something is stressful with money in the family.
Hmm.
I never had those feelings. I'm so lucky that I didn't
Hmm.
have those. But on the unlucky front, because we never talked about it, when you're going to sign your job applications and you're looking at
Hmm.
what the options are for stocks and things
Yeah.
like that, you're just like, I have no idea what any of this means.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid to ask anyone. And I
Hmm.
probably have made some bad decisions along the way, just by way of not knowing enough, and by never being like scared, or by
Yeah.
never understanding risk, or, any of that.
Hmm. Yeah, it depends on
So,
so many variables. I've seen people that come from, like, I would call what you came from is like a financially secure household. And
yes.
there's some good parts, but then some bad parts. Like, we never talked about money. Interview this woman for the book. She came from a family of uber wealth. And
Yeah.
yeah, similarly, it's like we always had money and we never talked about it. And that caused a lot of other problems when I was an adult. Whereas then there's the other
Yes.
side of it where people came from like a financially insecure household where there was never any money. And that may have bred, hey, oh, I'm going to be frugal. I'm going to save. I'm going to do something opposite to what I experienced because I don't want to live that life anymore. But
Right.
then also there's always something in there like, I'm terrified of taking risk. I hoard cash. I don't want to invest because I don't want to lose my money, all these other things. So no matter
Yeah.
kind of what, you know, type of household you came from, there's always probably going to be something in there that you're like, ooh, maybe that's not very good for me to continue to take with me in my adult journey. Maybe we need to
Yeah.
look at that and see if we
Yeah.
can change that.
And there's certainly been some uncomfortable conversations, like later in life, like let's call it in the last 10 years, that my sister and I think, have like noticed that our upbringing maybe hasn't led us to the most knowledgeable
Mm-hmm.
place, for finances. And sometimes I'll ask my dad a bunch of questions about something, the way we've done something in the past. And I'll actually notice that he gets uncomfortable when we're talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe apprehensive, and maybe even angry, maybe
Mm-hmm.
even,
Mm-hmm.
shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I think when you run a family business too, like there's this idea of
It's
not,
complicated.
it's, well, yes, it's complicated, but
With family. It's complicated.
it's also like none of your business, you're good. Like I
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
get that
Yeah.
vibe sometimes. And I
Mm-hmm.
know it's nothing like that my dad is doing intentionally, but that
Mm-mm.
comes from some of his upbringing, I think.
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, if your parents never talked about money,
Yeah.
or they would give you the cold shoulder, shut down, get angry if you ever brought it up, well, you're probably going to do that to your kids, or you're never going to ask any questions.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you think about it, it's like, again, where did those grandparents get that? They probably
Yeah.
experienced that themselves, and it's just been like generational trauma down the line.
Yeah. So back to your book.
Yeah.
How did the Vancouver scene play into this,
Mm.
and how has, like, leaving a full-time job to pursue something that you didn't know too much about affected your
Hmm.
relationship with money?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Vancouver was tricky. I loved living there. So I moved away 10 years ago when I was in my mid 20s. And part of it was affordability. I couldn't get a job that paid me a decent wage because I always had two jobs. Once I finished, got that first full-time job at this
Right.
newspaper that unfortunately went bankrupt,
Mm. Yep.
sadly. I had to have a second job, and I'm like, I'm exhausted. I've been doing this for like 3+ years. I don't want to always have two jobs in order to just to pay my bills. And
Mhm.
so everyone I talked to who moved to Toronto, or we even had friends that, or people we knew who moved from Toronto to Vancouver because they wanted more of a nicer lifestyle, like, oh yeah, there's great trees and hiking trails and yoga, but I found it very difficult to thrive there in a financial way. And same with my husband, and the music industry is very small there. And so we moved to Toronto in 2013 because there was just more opportunity here, and there really is. I would not have the career I have today if I stayed in Vancouver. I know that for a fact.
Hmm.
And so like moving to a place where there is kind of just in general more prosperity in terms of like you can work and build something and earn wealth, whereas in Vancouver I found a lot of it was generational wealth, or yeah, pretty much it's like you inherited. That's how you can afford these. You got a house because your parents bought it for you.
Yeah.
There is that in Toronto, of course, but I feel like there's a lot more diversity in terms of different financial backgrounds and stuff like that, which makes you feel more senior. Like, oh, I can find more people who are experiencing my situation. And I forget what the original question was, but I found like when I moved to Toronto, it gave me hope that did not exist in Vancouver. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the housing market is like a huge part of, I think, even what you
Uh,
talked about in your course, because it's
yeah.
so hard to get into the market, like
It's always been hard. And like that's the
ridiculous.
thing. Me and my husband Josh, we talked about because when I was learning, reading those books in my 20s, I'm like, we should buy some real estate. This is what everyone's saying. This was like, gosh, like 15 years ago, whatever. We of course could not afford anything in Vancouver or even like the surrounding suburbs at that point. It was so expensive back then. And so one of the good things about moving to Toronto was the market had not gone as crazy here yet. And so we were just coming from a place where it was impossible to own. Whereas here, I'm like, oh, you can still buy something. It's still expensive, but you can actually buy a condo. You can actually
Mhm.
buy a townhouse. And so for us, we're able to, not have the best paying jobs, and we're able to buy our first townhouse back in 2016. But now cut to 2023, 2024, I don't think if we didn't buy back then, we would not be able to afford place. There's no way. And
Yeah.
it's not fair because the story we
No.
were told from our parents was, take your time, get your degree, get a good job, and then you can buy a place. And yeah, that just didn't work out for most of us. Like it's impossible. I get questions all the time about, do you think Gen Z or they're having a harder time than millennials? I'm like, honestly, kind of, yeah, because
Yeah.
things were bad when we were in their situation in our 20s, just recovering from the recession. It was hard to find a job. There was lots of spending freezes or budget freezes with companies, no raises, no bonuses, etc. Now I feel like there's some pros where it's like it's easier to start a side hustle, whereas back then it's like I had to have an actual second job with a company, but no one's being paid. Like the salaries have not really updated in the past 10 years. I googled how much is like the average salary of a marketing coordinator in Toronto, and the other day, and it said about 56,000. I'm like, that is literally what I earned at my last job, which was 7 years ago as a marketing coordinator. It's
Right.
like, but the cost of living has
Inflation.
increased how much
Yeah.
by then? It's insane. So it's really difficult, and it's unfortunate I don't have the solution, except for
Yeah.
maybe it's about throwing out the roadmap you were given, or that you expected to use, and just play by your own rules. It's okay to rent. It's okay to live your life a little bit differently because
Yeah.
things are not the same as they were.
Shame is such a big part of
Oh,
many people's relationships with money.
oh yeah, that is like the number one, I think, feeling that people have. Even me, I still battle shame because we're constantly told that we're not good enough, we're not doing good enough
Yeah.
compared to all the people, on social media who are showing their lavish lifestyles. We don't know how they're funding those lifestyles,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we compare ourselves to these people, and then we feel shame for like, I can't believe I'm not good enough. I don't have that. I don't have this. I'm not reaching those milestones by these timelines that are set by someone else who has no idea what I'm going through. But yeah,
Mm.
it's difficult. And then also there's, not to mention just the shame of advertising and marketing if you don't own this stuff,
Yeah.
or the shame you get from maybe your parents for like, well, when I was your age I owned a home and I'm like, yeah, well, things were different back then. It's a shame all around. It's difficult. And I'd say the other thing to do with shame is when I first started, learning about personal finance in my 20s, that was the overall tone of most money experts. Some of them still exist today. They're older and they're cranky, and I cannot stand these people, but they still have microphones somehow. And it was very much the Simon Cowell American Idol kind of vibe, where they were just blaming you and shaming you for not doing good enough as a motivator for you to do better. That sure, like, how's that going to work out? Like,
Yeah.
I used to watch these shows and read these books, and it on one hand, I do, because of probably my trauma, I do find motivation from like kind of these negative tones. I'm like, fine, I'll show you. You don't think I'm good enough. But on the other side, then I hung on to a lot of this. I never feel good enough. I know, like it's so it's why I try to always come from a
Yeah.
place of like empathy, because there was just no empathy back in the day. It was all just like, you're not, if you don't do this task, then you don't get this prize money from this TV show or whatever the heck. And it's
Yeah.
brutal. This is not what we need. We need more understanding and
Yeah.
empathy and kindness, not, just brutal honesty, which is really just, it's not honesty. It's just being, blunt and rude.
Even something as simple as like someone saying, "Oh, you don't own it? You're renting?" Like,
Yeah, and you're like, yeah, I need a roof over my head. But
yeah, don't you?
and it's
Like,
like, and I always think when someone says that, I'm like, well, if you own, tell me how you were able to manage that. There was some stat that I saw the other day. I can't remember it exactly, but it was an incredibly high percentage of young people are able to buy a home because they get money from their parents in
oh,
some
I'm
way.
one of them. Like
Yeah. And
my
I don't
parents
want to
have
shame
had
people
to
for
help
that. I
me.
mean, we've definitely had some help as well, but it's one of those things where it's like, then don't judge people who don't have that privilege. Like, that is a privilege. You did not
Yes.
earn that.
Yeah.
So acknowledge that, and don't shame for people who weren't able to have that same privilege. That's ridiculous. But I think part of that is also the idea, the message that we all got from our parents, that they probably got from their parents, is renting is throwing your money away. I remember
Yes.
my
Yes.
my husband's stepfather used to talk about this. I mean, he's in this in 70s, so it was a very different time where I grew up. He's like, oh, I knew people who just rented all their lives, and where are they now? Where he bought his first home in his 20s. And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe they did something differently. Like, there are lots of stats that can show you can build wealth without owning a property, because they
Yeah.
are very expensive to upkeep. You can invest the difference and still do well. It's okay.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about other ways of investing other than real estate. And this
Mm,
could maybe get us into a talk about like end of year and
yeah.
taking stock for beginning of year and more like the budgeting side of things.
Hmm.
And, for anyone who has never thought about this stuff, I know I hadn't
Hmm.
until, again, I was walking away from a company and going to start my own business.
Hmm.
And you were a part of that. So,
I'd say the first thing, because this is what I see from so many people who are working for a company and maybe got thrown in, didn't really look at like their employment package, which is totally fine. And they're maybe not taking advantage of all of the things, like all their benefits and stuff. I remember my last job. It was for this big corporate law firm. And, I had several jobs at that point. I was, very savvy with personal finance. So I knew exactly the first thing you do is find out, hey, do you have a group RSP or a pension? Because I want in. I want that money
opt
from the
in.
employer. If you are not opted in, you are not getting that extra money from your employer, who's going to match your contributions. And I remember at this particular place, you could only opt in if you'd been there for 2 years, which was really annoying. But whatever, I did my time, got in.
Yeah.
And then I think retroactively, they kind of match your contributions, because you can make it like a lump sum or something like that. I talked to people in my department and no one else was contributing. And I'm like, you are literally leaving money
On the
like
table.
on the table, because they are going to match your contributions. This is money you will not get if you're not participating. So that's the number one thing. If you have a job and you're not sure if they have a plan, ask, get that money. Because I think also another thing, people think that, well, what if I want to leave the job? It's like, you can take that money with you. You can move it. It is not there forever. You can move it to a different institution once you leave. That's not a problem. So make sure to just take advantage of that. It's free money.
Yep.
Number two, you need to invest on your own. And what I see most people do, this is like literally 99% of the people I talk to on the calls for my course, is they are working with mom and dad's financial planner or financial advisor at the
Yeah.
bank. And they feel like most of the reason they are interested in learning this for themselves is they feel like they're not really getting value for the fee that they're paying, or because most people don't also understand that the fee, they are paying fees. It comes off of what your investable assets are. So it's kind of invisible, but you are spending money to have that service by them. And they feel like talked down to, not understood, not heard, not getting what they need. And so for me, that's why I'm really, passionate about educating people on how to learn to do it on your own, whether that's using a robo advisor, but really understanding what that means, not just like doing the form and then, I don't know, I'm in a portfolio, but I don't know what I'm investing in. We need to understand what we're investing in, or really doing it on your own, which is called self-directed investing or do-it-yourself investing,
Yeah.
building your own portfolio. Show you how to do all these different things in the course.
I
But
will link to the course, by the way, in the show notes. Yes.
but these things are
Yeah.
possible, and it's so much easier now, literally compared to 5, 6, 7 years ago, where I think that the first robo advisor, Well Simple, came about maybe in 2015. Like, it hasn't been around, maybe a little bit later, but it hasn't been around that long. Because I remember when I was trying to figure out how could I invest my money, it was impossible. It was like, well, you have to either have money in order to work with a wealth management firm. They're like, oh, sorry, you can't work with this unless you have 6 figures to invest. And you're like, well,
Jesus.
I don't have 6 figures. Or what most people do, and this is what I did, like most people, go to the bank, talk to an advisor, and then they're going to pitch you, oh, here's a portfolio of some very high fee, actively managed mutual funds, which I'm not a fan of. And so you feel like, well, what are my options? And the options are, there are more options. Robo advisor, do it on your own. You can learn this stuff. I did. Everyone can learn this. It can be very simple. With that said, when you're like Googling how to invest, there's a lot of different strategies out there, right? And so
Can be
for me,
intimidating.
yeah, it's intimidating. Hence why, honestly, like part of the reason I'm like really glad I did some of this formal training on my path to become CFP is it really demystified it. Like, I'm like, what are all the different strategies? You Google it and it's so hard to keep up. When I did the Canadian Securities course back in 2020 during the height of the pandemic, it was like the most stressful set of exams I've ever done, having to do it in a room because they didn't do it online at the point. I had to go into this office with other people. There was no vaccine. I'm like, I'm going to die with your mask on for like a 2 to 3 hour exam. I literally almost had a panic attack. But it
Oh
was
my
great.
God.
Looking back, I'm like, I'm glad I did those because I learned a lot that I can then pass on to other people, so they
Yeah.
don't have to do that terrible exam. But there's strategies. Basically, they're broken into 2 categories: passive investing, active investing. Passive investing is what I teach, which is really about just like, we're not trying to beat the stock market, we just want to match it. And the stock market in general has gone up 8-9% every year annualized. So it's not always 8 or 9%, but just over the course of time on average. Active investing is when you're trying to beat the market. So it's really just like
Yeah.
about different goals. So, when you hear people stock picking or dividend investing, so they're only investing in stocks that pay out dividends, those are versions of active investing. But there's so many, like momentum, value investing, all these different types, which is really more complex. And studies show, honestly, they don't actually, like, it's very difficult for especially an individual investor who isn't like a professional to beat the market, which is why I'm like, just match it. Just do index funds. It's
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair. Okay. So, end of year advice. What should, and it's okay if, you're taking in this conversation at the beginning
That's
of the
okay.
year. Because really, if you look at tax season, we got a couple months to go before
Is
we
it
got our
bad that
hand
I love tax season? It's like one of my
You're
favorite
a
times. I'm a
weirdo.
weird one. I know. My accountant's like, okay. I'm like, I really enjoy it because I
I
like
really enjoy it.
well, I think part of it is more exciting being self-employed because you're like, how much do I owe? Or
It's
do I
kinda
get any
looking
money back?
I guess you know what? I might understand that thrill because, and I think you'll be proud of me, and this does tell me that I learned something in your course. I would say
Mhm.
that I did a lot of like the learning stuff, and then I just haven't done like the
Mhm.
going to
Yeah.
figure out what I want to invest in
Yeah.
next. So I'm like a halfer. I'm a
Yeah.
halfer.
Yeah.
But when I came out of my first year working for myself, owing $10,
Ooh,
I was like, okay,
that feels nice. Yeah.
that I feel like I did this all right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's scary. Like, I hear stories from people being like, this is my first year being self-employed. I didn't
Yeah.
know I had to save money in advance for taxes. And now I owe $10,000, which I don't have. Like, yeah, we don't want to be there. We want to
Yeah.
keep track of things.
And for the record, I
Yeah.
do like pay an accountant who
Yes.
is,
I always
is
tell people,
also
like, I get questions
yes.
all the time, especially I have
Yeah.
a bunch of YouTube videos that I've made over the years on taxes, especially for self-employed taxes, because I couldn't
Yeah.
find any videos. I still get so many questions about like, da 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 da. And I'm always, it's like, here's my answer, but please find an accountant. Is money well spent? They will be
Yes.
able to I have an account. Like they're money well spent.
Most bank backends, I've really noticed that there are some tools in the back
Mm-hmm.
end of my bank that I haven't even ever looked at, but they're
Yeah.
there
Mm-hmm.
where you can look at the different pockets in which you're
Yeah.
spending money if you have not made a formal budget, where you can actually like be
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so the bank has classified all this stuff for me.
Oh yeah. Take
And
advantage of these free
yeah,
tools that honestly like did not exist like just a few years ago. Now all the banks are like, "Oh, we need to get some tools. People are asking for this." Yeah, they're free. Take advantage.
yeah.
But if you can like I'm old school. I've got a spreadsheet. I've been using it for years. It is my guiding light. I get excited at the beginning of every new year to kind of redo it, update some things, but
Yeah.
what you can do at the end of the year is start to craft that, like create those goals, those plans for yourself, and start to maybe take a look at what your spending has been throughout the year, just like the last 3 months or 4 months, just to get an average, and then plug those numbers into that spreadsheet so you have a bit of a foundation. Okay, this is what we likely will experience next year. How can we do things differently? How can we spend our money differently? How can we save some more money? Like really prioritizing your savings, whether that's saving for or really investing for retirement or any other
Mm-hmm.
kind of goal, and saving for those short-term goals. You want to go on a trip, this time next year, start saving now. I mean, me and my husband have always had a travel fund that we automatically every single
Yeah.
month put money into, which is great because not only is it like fun putting money into that travel fund because you're like, ooh, this means we're one step closer to maybe being
Yeah.
able to go on a trip. But then when you are maybe doing some searches for what are some good deals right now, and you're like, oh, I found a great deal, and maybe you just have to put a deposit, you'll have money in that travel fund for that deposit. And then by the time you have to pay the full thing, end of the year or
Smart.
whatever, you got the money in your bank account, which is really
I
exciting. This is
love that.
literally what I did this year.
Where are you going?
Cancun. Very excited. So
Yeah.
definitely the budget, the planning, the goal setting is really great. And if you have a bonus, for example, lots of people are getting holiday bonuses or maybe getting a raise or something like that, make a plan for what you want to do with that money. I always tell people, put like 20% to do whatever you want with it, and maybe the rest, the 80%, into something a little bit smarter. Do not
Yeah.
spend your bonus or even like your tax refund when you're like, oh, I'm getting a tax. Don't spend it before it lands in your bank account. Don't do that because it
Yeah.
may be less than you thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you can make a plan to use that bonus for a purpose, like, oh, we're so close to hitting that amount that I wanted, or maxing out my TFSA or something like that, use that money in that way. I've
Yeah.
never regretted saving money. I'll just say that. I've regretted spending money on stupid crap, I will say.
What's the dumbest thing you've ever bought?
I'll tell you right now.
She knows.
I'll tell you right now. I know it. I still regret it. I'm so mad at myself for doing this. I got really spendy in 2022. Me and my husband sold our townhouse in 2021, bought a house in 2022, and I was very excited. And I had finally like an actual proper room I could call an office. And I was really obsessed with this idea of getting built-in desks. And so I wanted to have one built-in desk I could work from, and another one that would be kind of like a little beauty studio. I could have my like, makeup and stuff like that. And
Because
I
you're on
hired
camera now and killing it.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so instead of trying to do it in my tiny little bathroom, and so I hired a company to do it, and it was expensive and crap. Like I'm so mad at like they had to redo it. Like they put it together. I'm like, this looks terrible. Like I'm not paying for this. You have to redo it. Like it's literally not like level. It's not level. And so they had to redo it. And when they did, they ripped up parts of the wall that are still not fixed because I'm just too angry to learn how to do it myself and fix it and stuff like that. So that was a big waste of money.
Okay.
Just like
So
I
don't
got
buy the built-in desk.
don't, and then also I'm just like, why did I get permanent desks? Now I can never use this room for like a bonus room for like if my parents stay.
Yeah.
Like it's just it was an emotional, like I look back, I'm like 2022 was a year of emotional spending. Like everything I spent money on, I'm like, you were emotional when you bought that.
Okay. On the flip side, best investment of money, whether it's in like a thing or I mean,
yeah.
Don't be
Yeah.
lame and answer with RRSPs.
No. I won't say lame answers like that.
But that's good too.
That is good too. Yeah. I'll say great question. Probably I've got this DSLR I bought several years ago. I think I got it a little bit on sale. I always like a deal.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to start a YouTube channel.
Who doesn't know,
Yeah. Sorry. So it's a Canon 7DD. And I want to start a YouTube channel. So I can start this new, part of my business. And yeah, it's been great. I mean, I haven't been doing YouTube so much this year, but almost
Yeah.
at 25,000 subscribers. So we're
We
getting there.
love
Not too
it.
bad. And that
Yeah.
was a great way to not only, hey, let's, try to make money in that way, but
Yeah.
also it's been a great way for me to kind of go back to my filmmaker roots a little bit,
That's
like,
cool. Full
hey, that
circle.
degree is finally paying
You knew what to do with that DSLR.
a little bit. I honestly, no, things have changed since my time.
Look, two of us, both content creators, we have
Yeah.
both come about it completely different ways and
Yeah.
landed in spaces that we maybe didn't even think we'd ever be landing in. And look at
Yeah.
us go. It's
Look at it. And
awesome.
that's the thing. You've got to embrace the journey because believe me,
Yeah.
along the way, I was very frustrated. Things weren't going fast enough. It went in a direction I never thought it would, in like
Yeah.
a way I didn't want it to. Believe me, there were so many points where I'm like, should I just quit? Should I just stop trying? And,
No.
even still, I have those thoughts because you compare yourself to bigger creators like, gosh, I'm not at that level and I've been doing it for so long. But you've
Yeah.
got to have a really good reason for why you're doing it. So I'm not doing this. So
That's
I
when it
can
pays
make the most.
off, is when you can feel the
Yeah.
passion.
Yeah, you've got to have that like really grounded. I'm doing this because I want to be that voice for someone who was like me when in their 20s or
Yes.
whatever age
Yes.
and feel like they're not being heard or seen and they find me they're like, "Oh, maybe I can tackle my finances." That is literally the only thing that is driving me. It is not the subscriber numbers, I want to hit
Yeah.
these money things. Oh, no, that's literally not what it is. Because
Yeah.
I mean, if it was, like I wouldn't have done it for free for so many years.
We know. We know. Totally fair. So the book, I know it's a ways away still. It was so funny. Jess got the news that she was going to be writing this book while she was
Yeah.
like, freaking out eating an omelet at my place. And I
Yeah.
was like, what's going on? And she's like, well, you're going to be the first person I told this to. And we had just hung out for like the first time, just us two,
Yeah,
not in a
we
group.
did that at 45 and I was
Yeah.
exhausted.
And she's like, well, you're the first person I'm telling I'm writing a book. So the book
Crazy.
is 2025.
January 2025,
Okay.
title TBD. But yeah, that is when it's going to be coming out. And yeah, I'm excited. 2024 is me editing the book and we'll see. We'll see. I mean, no one has read anything I've written. So I'm excited and terrified what my editor will think. But
Okay.
I'm really proud of it. I'm really, really excited about it.
And just again, that's it, like a deep dive into, finding your relationship with money.
It's basically, yeah, it's like discovering what your current relationship with money is or why you do the things you do and you don't know why. And then how can we fix these things?
The
How can we
psychology
develop?
of it.
Yeah, it's the psychology and the
Wow.
behavior and all the things wrapped into one. Why do most people struggle with money when it isn't necessarily a lack of information? Because the information's out there, but people are struggling. Why is that?
Love this. Okay.
Mhm.
And is there anything we should direct people to in the show notes that I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, well, so you can find me on my website, jessicamoorehouse.com. If you want to learn more about the course that we kind of mentioned, Wealth Building
Yeah.
Blueprint for Canadians, jessicamoorehouse.com/course. And, you can find me on YouTube, just under my name,
Your
Jessica
socials are
Morehouse.
so good.
Yeah, and then Instagram, Jessica I. Morehouse is the handle.
You're honestly
And the
one
More
of my
Money
favorite.
podcast. I forgot. I have a podcast too.
We will link to the podcast. We will link to the course. We will link to her website.
Amazing.
Also, some great resources on that website too, if you're just
Mhm.
looking for kind of like a la carte, like
Yep.
budgeting type
Yep.
of things and stuff like that, which was very helpful for me. So I will make sure
Amazing.
that I specifically link to that.
If I can come from a place of like, I don't know what the difference between a checking and savings account is, and now I'm teaching people about investing, that gives hope for everybody, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, thank you for making it so easily digestible. And yeah, have a listen to the More Money podcast with Jess Morehouse.